Hey everybody, let's talk about digestion. So this is the figure right out of your coloring page for the digestive system. And you can tell I already started and had to start over. But if you are taking in food, the very first place you take in food is through the oral cavity. Okay? And in the oral cavity, you do both mechanical and chemical digestion. So mechanical digestion happens with the teeth, and it's just about ripping stuff up. Okay, and it happens to every kind of biomolecule. The specific kind of chemical digestion that happens in the mouth happens with salivary amylase. Salivary amylase, which is the enzyme that breaks down, that digests carbohydrates. Okay, so the mechanical digestion in the mouth, which involves the teeth, will break down any kind of biomolecule. It just rips it, right? Whereas chemical digestion in the mouth happens with salivary amylase, which is an enzyme that breaks down carbs, and this is secreted by the salivary glands. Okay, so that makes sense. They don't always make sense, okay? So that's the first place where food goes when you're digesting it, okay? The second place, it goes into the pharynx. So once it leaves the oral cavity, it goes into the pharynx. So that's this part. And remember that the pharynx, the pharynx is the shared space with the respiratory system. Okay, and so that means that food and air both go into the pharynx. Now, the epiglottis sits right here. Okay, so let's go up here. So the epiglottis is the flap that covers the flap that covers the trachea, or esophagus. And so that's the flap that determines, are you going to breathe in and then it's going to go into your trachea, which is going to go down to the lungs, or are you going to be taking in food and then that food passes through the pharynx, goes past the esophagus and then, past the epiglottis and into the esophagus, okay? So when you when you choke on something, what's happening is it's getting, instead of going into the esophagus, it gets diverted into the trachea, and then it starts to obstruct your lungs, and so that's a problem, okay? So the epiglottis tries to prevent that from happening. So when water goes down the wrong tube, what we're saying is, instead of going into the esophagus to go down to the stomach, it goes into the trachea instead, because the epiglottis was bypassed. Oops, okay. So then what's the next thing that happens? So we've gone oral cavity, pharynx. There's no digestion that happens in the pharynx. There's no digestion that happens in the esophagus. So that's the next part. Okay. Esophagus. It's just the tube that connects the pharynx to the stomach. But remember, this is the tube that does peristalsis. Okay. So peristalsis is the wave of muscular motion. Your motion that moves food or moves stuff from one place to another. One end of tube to the other. And this is like the toothpaste squishing. So when you can imagine the tube like squishing all the way down. So you start with a wave of mechanical action here, the muscles start to contract, squish, 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 and it squishes it all down to the stomach, okay? Awesome. So that's peristalsis. That is that wave of muscular contractions that are going to move food from the top of the esophagus all the way down to the stomach. So in theory, if you get food past the epiglottis into the esophagus where it should be, and then you hang upside down, you'll still push that food towards your stomach. It's not going to come back out. But they tell you not to, because what if you don't miss the epiglottis and then it goes in your trachea? Dun, 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 dangerous. Okay. So then what happens after the esophagus? After the esophagus, we get to the stomach. Okay, so that's this part. Okay, so what's happening in the stomach? So the stomach, this is the site of protein digestion. Protein chemical digestion. Okay, and this is done by acids. Okay, so there are acids and proteases. Let's do and proteases, which are enzymes that break down proteins. So that ACE, remember, means it breaks it down. Okay, so those are secreted by the stomach wall itself. Okay, so proteins don't get digested chemically until they get to the stomach. Nothing else gets digested in the stomach. Everything else is just waiting its turn. Okay, so then we go from the stomach into the small intestine. Now you might say, wait a minute, what about, so this is the small intestine. Oh my gosh, there's so much of it. This is all small intestine. Lots of stuff is happening in the small intestine. So let's talk about all that stuff, okay? So the small intestine, can you still see it? Yeah, sort of, okay. The small intestine. What kind of fun stuff is happening in the small intestine? So first of all, this is the site of fat chemical digestion. Remember that our technical way to say fat is to say lipid. Okay, so lipid digestion. Okay, and this is done with bile. So digested by bile. Okay, that is made, so bile is made in the liver. So where's the liver, you might ask? What a good question. This gigantic thing back here is the liver. Now that's not all the liver does, and we're going to see examples of that in just a second. But this giant thing that goes back behind the stomach is the liver. Okay? So, liver. So the bile is made in the liver and then sent to the gallbladder. And then the gallbladder, so this is the gallbladder. Oh, I need a different color. Here we go. The gallbladder's here. And so the gallbladder stores that bile until it's needed. Gallbladder. Stores and releases bile. Okay? So that's very important. So food never goes into the gallbladder, but the gallbladder is really important for dumping bile into the small intestine. And you can see it does it right at the very start of that small intestine. Okay? So the small intestine is also the site of more carb digestion, carbohydrate chemical digestion. And this is done by amylase, again. But it's not salivary amylase because it's not being secreted by the salivary glands like it is in the mouth. Okay, so this is pancreatic amylase. Pancreatic. So guess where that comes from? Oh, the pancreas. So the pancreas sits behind the stomach. So it's this guy. Okay, so the pancreas does a lot of things, but in this case for the digestive system, it so this is made in pancreas. So for the digestive system, the pancreas makes pancreatic amylase. It then secretes it into the small intestine. Small intestine. Again at the beginning. Okay? But, so now we've broken down so many things. We've broken down proteins. We've broken down, so the stomach breaks down proteins. We're breaking down lipids and carbohydrates in the small intestine. Cool, we're breaking it all down. That's awesome. But now what? Oh, cool. Just wait. The small intestine is also, is the site of nutrient absorption. Nutrient absorption. Okay, so nutrients get absorbed in the small intestine. That's why it's kind of the smallest tube in all of this system. So there's a whole lot more tube than this really shows. But it's saying that the, let's see, if we look at this example. So this is again from your coloring sheet. So if you've started breaking down all of these things, okay, the proteins, the carbohydrates, and the fats, and you're starting to break that stuff down, you want it to get out of the digestive system and into the blood system, okay? So you have all these things that are ready to be absorbed by your body. They don't do any good just sitting in the small intestine. They have to be absorbed by the hepatic. So what this isn't showing is that there are all these blood vessels that sit on top of the small intestine, okay? You see that? Yeah. So the hepatic portal vein system takes those absorbed nutrients, nutrients to the liver. Okay, so the fact that the small intestine is so long and so convoluted in that it's like so twisty-turny means there's a lot of surface area. Hint, hint, so much surface area. So much surface area. Which means it can interact with the blood vessels a lot. The more it interacts with the blood vessels and the more surface area you have, the more site for nutrient absorption you have. Okay, very, very important. So we're absorbing all these nutrients in the small intestine, but that's not all. We keep going. Now, by the time we're in the small intestine and the stomach, actually, we are no longer called food. We're called chyme. Anytime you've mixed it with chemicals, you're now chyme. Okay, so that chyme leaves the small intestine and goes into the large intestine. Okay, so the large intestine, which is also called the colon. Okay, this is the site of water absorption, and also vitamin absorption. It's also the site of vitamin creation very frequently. Okay, so then by the time you get to the end of the small intestine, you no longer have chyme. All you have left is feces. Okay, so your body wants to get rid of feces. Someone asked a good question today. Why does feces smell the way it does? Well, it smells gross. We don't like it. Well, we don't like it on purpose so that we don't try to eat it. Okay, so our ancestors who are trying to find food wouldn't be like, you know what's awesome? All of that waste material, and then they would eat it. No, it smells bad to us on purpose so that we don't eat it because it's bad for us. Okay, so once it gets to this point, we now, when we're ready to get rid of all this waste material, we get to the rectum, which just stores feces until you're ready to release it through the anus, which is here. Whoop. So the anus is just a sphincter. It's a ring of muscles that you control. You learn how to control when you're a kid in your potty training. So you know when to release it so that it's socially appropriate. It's very important for humans to be socially appropriate in that way. And also, if you're an animal, you learn where to release it so that you're less likely to be tracked down and killed by a predator. Okay, we don't have to worry about that as humans. We have to worry about doing it where it's socially appropriate and therefore less of a health hazard. Okay, so that is the digestive system. Do I want to tell you anything else? No, I think that's it. I think that's all you really need to know about the digestive system. Make sure you know the order of all of the organs. Make sure you know what they do and the importance of that surface area, okay? So why do we need a lot of surface area? The more surface area you have in the small intestines, the more site of nutrient absorption. So where you take the nutrients out of the digestive system and put it into the blood system. Very important. Okay, next video is going to be about the respiratory system.